Thank you everyone for joining. I'm extremely excited to introduce Dr. Edmund Adjapong, who is a native of Bronx, New York City. I'm from Queens myself, and an assistant professor in the Education Studies Department at Seton Hall University. Dr. Adjapong was someone who was requested specifically by our students, given the work that he does in education and really works to engage students whom he serves both in K through 12 before and now at the college level. So excited to hear your talk, what colleges look for in candidates, and take it away.
Cool. Good morning. This is good early Sunday morning for everybody. Thanks for having me. I'm excited just to share my experiences. I think today I'm going to really talk primarily about just my path towards where I am right now, the journey that I took, the steps that I took, and my thoughts in taking those steps, and hopefully I can support and help those who are interested and curious about higher education, who are persistent, and who really want their needs met in higher education. So I'll talk about my journey now, then I'll talk about from my experiences what I believe colleges look for in candidates, and we'll have a good time, and we'll have some questions at the end, and we'll go from there. So again, Dr. Adjapong from Seton Hall University. And I engage in a bunch of community organizations that I'll talk about throughout my presentation. So to get started, a little bit about myself. I always like to share my life story and my narrative because I think it's my story and my narrative is very tied to what I do and my work. So I'm a child of two immigrant parents, and my parents migrated from Ghana, West Africa, to the Bronx, New York. And, like most immigrants, they want a better life for their children. As a child of immigrant parents, I kind of had different realities than a lot of people in my community in the Bronx. But my parents were very focused on making sure that I had the best education that they had access to, and that was public education. So, our parents came to America. They, all of us we were born and we were in public schools, and we just had to make the best of our experiences. We didn't really have the resources for any other types of education, private or Catholic schools. So, we had to make the best out of our public education. I'm the youngest of three children, and I talk about my college going experience. Both my older brother and older sister went to college. So when it was my time to graduate high school, I didn't really have any other option. My parents definitely expected me to continue to go to college. So I did so. And I'll talk about all those things a little later on in the presentation. So growing up in the Bronx, this is actual picture of my community in the Bronx. And I grew up in the South Bronx section of Soundview, and I just love my community. I love everything the Bronx had to offer me as a child. I went to a community school that's in the picture. So my apartment building was literally adjacent to my elementary school, and I went to K through 5th grade there. And I had a lot of good experiences in that school, and I'll talk about some of the bad experiences I had in that school. But what's really great about going to community school is that I grew up with everybody in my community. Every summer, all the times, me and my friends would play basketball. We'll hang out and recite rap songs. So it was really good and fun to go to school with people in my community. But I think there's another line when it comes to public schools as it relates to people of color is that a lot of my experiences were me not following teacher instructions, or me not not meeting my teachers' expectations in the sense that I think a lot of expectations that my teachers had for me at the time were kind of absurd. I really felt like as a child that my teacher didn't really understand my experiences and my realities as a young man of color. And they didn't allow me to bring my authentic self into the classroom, into the school. So, I enjoyed going to school. I knew I had to go to school because of my family and my parents' attitudes towards education. But oftentimes when I went to school, especially in elementary school and middle school, which I'll talk about in a second, I just wasn't engaged and I just didn't want to be there. Ironically, my teachers identified me as a student who was gifted and talented, and then really encouraged me to go to a school for gifted and talented students. But before that, there's many incidents in this elementary school where I just didn't feel connected. And one incident that I share a lot is a time where it's the specific story where I was in the 3rd grade and my teacher asked us to line up in the hallway, most elementary school teachers ask their students to do, and they asked us just to be silent. We were walking past the principal's office, and we were silent. We were standing in size orders, similar to people in the army and such. And we're walking past the principal's office, and I guess she wanted us to be quiet because she didn't want us to make any noise. She wanted to bring any attention to herself as an educator. as walking past the principal's office, right? People think that you're a great teacher and a great educator if you have control over your students. And I remember at that point, I was sitting in the back of the line. I was one of the taller kids in my class, and I scratched my head. And my teacher pulled me out the line and reprimanded me and called my parents. And, you know, at that point, I just felt like, you know, I didn't understand what I did wrong. I had an itch in my head, and I scratched it. And, you know, there was no conversation about what I did wrong and what I can do to be better. So, you know, from there going on, I just felt targeted, you know, as a young person in school. So after I left that school in the 5th grade, I went to a school for gifted and talented students. I thought that my experiences around education would change a little bit. I was kind of a little bit more insightful because this is the school that, you know, all the students in the Bronx went to who were gifted and talented. But for me, that meant leaving my immediate and intimate neighborhood and community and going and traveling to a school which is outside of my community. So this is a picture of a map of like kind of like the southeast Bronx. And I went to school at PS 93 for elementary school, and I went to MS 101, which is on the right side of the map, for middle school. So that was about a 45-minute ride on the public bus that I was taking as a 12-year-old going to school. And, you know, I enjoyed, I felt proud and confident as a child taking the public bus going to school. But I think the things that I realized, the things that I really appreciated about schools was that I was allowed to go to schools with people in my community and my friends. And I no longer had that privilege when I went to a gifted and talented school, which is outside of my community. My middle school, which was in a predominantly white neighborhood, most of my teachers were predominantly white, and there were few students of color in that school. So then I was kind of just alienated, and I felt alienated in that space, and didn't have great relationships with my teachers, didn't have great relationships with my peers. I didn't understand why I was there. And at that point in middle school, I went from the 6th to 8th grade, like super disengaged from school, and didn't know, you know, the future for me in education was really dismal. And I could never tell you, if you asked me in middle school or in high school if I was going to be a professor or a teacher teaching other people how to be educators, I would laugh at you. But ironically, I made it here, and I don't think it's happenstance. So I graduated from that gifted and talented middle school and went to a school in the Bronx for medical professions because, you know, I have African parents, and a lot of African and West Indian parents, they want their students to go on and get jobs in the health and medical field. So, you know, I always wanted to just make my parents proud, as most children want to do. And I went to the school, and at this school, there was a teacher who was playing hip hop in the classroom. He was playing hip hop music, and first I'm like, why are you playing hip hop music? You know, I love hip hop music. I identify as somebody who of hip hop culture. And in my experiences in schools, my hip hop self was never allowed in school spaces. So I was really confused when I heard this teacher playing hip hop music. Over time, this teacher became a mentor to me, and through this class, that 9th grade physics class, I realized that I can do science, because not only do we listen to hip hop music in our class, but we made connections between hip hop culture and urban communities and science. So we were making connections between the things that we saw every day, the things that we loved, the things that we engaged in science. And that really gave me the confidence and the skill to say, like, I can do science and I can be a scientist. So when I graduated from high school, I went to SUNY Plattsburgh, upstate New York, and I declared a biochemistry degree. And I went to school to study biochemistry, and I graduated with honors. And I wanted to be a pharmacist, and that's why I studied biochemistry. But I think maybe mid-year through my college tenure, I realized that I could be a pharmacist if I really wanted to, but that's not where my passion was, right? I think I interned as a pharmacist, and I was standing behind a counter and just like shelving drugs and things like that. And that was fun. I can do it, but I wasn't interacting with people. And I would look back at my experiences and what I was doing while I was in college, and I realized I was always going back and mentoring young students in my high school. I was doing a lot of tutoring on campus. I just loved engaging and working with young people and helping people understand content, and just helping people boost their confidence as it relates to education, and ensuring that they know that they can kind of receive and do anything that they want to do in the world of education. So I found that, you know, kind of my life's calling was to go into education and become a teacher. So I kind of like stopped going down the pharmacy track And I was like, okay, I'm going to start taking some education classes so I can kind of get the hang of it. So I found the thing that motivated me and the thing that I love to do kind of early on in college. But, there was a time, during my college career, maybe for about a year, where I had no idea of what I wanted to do. And I'm the type of person who I'm very sure of myself. I always have my next 3 or 4 steps calculated. And that year where I had no idea what I wanted to do was really challenging because that was never me. So I really struggled, but I also took that year to just really just like kind of get in tune with myself and who I was and learn more about myself so I could really identify my passion and my dreams, because the things that we don't want to do is pursue a career that, we don't love, right? Because I tell everybody, if you find something that you love, you will never have to work another day in your life, right? As an educator, I'm working nonstop, but I love what I do. So it doesn't really feel like work. So once I realized, I just loved engaging and interacting with young people, I started getting jobs and internships in community development spaces and started working with young people. And these are pictures of me teaching and engaging with young people, because this is kind of where my joy is. And this is what kind of makes me happy. It makes me feel free. And these are all students that I've taught in the past. And, I went on to grad school and I got my degree, my certificate in teaching, and I started teaching in the sixth grade science in the Bronx, and actually taught in the same community where I taught, which was intentional because I realized that students of color had the same experiences in schools that I had. They didn't really feel connected to the content. They didn't really see the importance of learning content, especially science. So I wanted to think about how can I really encourage more young people to become scientists and understand that they can be scientists if they so chose. So then I went on, I started teaching, and I would, when I started teaching, I started engaging in the same practices that made me disengage as a student that my teachers when I was a child were teaching me. So I thought, because I was young, because I was a male of color, that I was going to automatically connect with my students. And I did have connections with my students and we had a great time, but it wasn't as fruitful as I thought it would be. And then I realized that I was missing something, and the thing I was missing was like really incorporating my young people's culture and their experiences in the classroom the same way that my ninth grade teacher did with me, that really sparked my motivation to become a scientist. So I came around this realization when I went to a J. Cole concert, and I'm a real big J. Cole fan. And I went to a J. Cole concert, and he has this one part in his shows where he tells everybody to put their hands up in the sky, and everybody put their hands up in the sky and wave them side to side. And I'm like, wow, this one guy, when I go to his concerts, I'll see him, just how he interacts and engages with the crowd and the audience, and how everybody's just so receptive to him. And I'm thinking about at that point, like, how can we allow our young people to make connections with their lives and their hip hop identities while in the classroom? And it was here when I came up and conceptualized a framework for utilizing hip hop in classes and to teach students through a hip hop framework. And that's actually what I studied for my dissertation when I was at Teachers College. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. So J. Cole really inspired me to really think about how I can really incorporate hip hop in the teaching of my classrooms to really engage students to love and connect with science. So a little bit more about my college and higher education experiences and trajectory. So I went to SUNY Plattsburgh and I spent 4.5 years at SUNY Plattsburgh, and I stayed for an extra semester, not because I felt like I wasn't prepared or because I actually needed to, but because I felt like my work there wasn't done. I was part of a fraternity at SUNY Plattsburgh, and we chartered my last year, and I was president of that fraternity. So I thought it was important for me to stay for extra semester just to make sure that legacy continued, and that the people who came after me were really developed. And after graduating from SUNY Plattsburgh, I applied and got into Teachers College, Columbia University. And this is where I kind of spent most of my tenure in higher education. So I got my master's in teaching from Teachers College, which was an MA in science education. And I also earned 3 other degrees, which from Teachers College, which are a master's in education, a master's in philosophy, and my PhD from Teachers College. And I'm going to talk in a little bit more detail in a little bit about my trajectory and how I got there and how I got those things. And then ultimately, from Teachers College, after graduating my doctorate degree, I went to Seton Hall University, where I now teach teachers. I teach pre-service teachers who want to become educators, and I teach classes around hip hop, urban education, and culture in education. So here's a video about just some of my work and my research, and I think it'll give you some more insight about what I do and what drives me to doing what I do. So I'm going to share my screen so we could all watch this video, and I'll come back and share some more points.
Then you go to the top. My name is Dr. Edmund Adjapong. I'm from the Bronx, New York. So I grew up in the Southeast section of the Bronx, New York, my entire life, and still continue to live there. And as a child, I went to elementary school in my neighborhood, and for middle school, I went to a school for gifted and talented students. As a child, I really always loved science. I always was curious about the world and just how things worked and, you know, why things were the way they were. The demographic of students was one that did not represent me. There weren't that many students of color in that school. There weren't that many teachers of color in that school. So I just found myself very disengaged in all of my classes, especially my science class. My bad. From that point, I went to high school and I met a young black male teacher who used hip hop to engage me. And I loved hip hop. My first album that I bought was Jay-Z's Blueprint. And that teacher really just allowed me to feel genuine and allowed me to use my hip hop self to connect to science. And that's why I developed my science identity.
We can write it, do not perfect timing. You and Johnny, we will style it, they silent. Science everywhere. We got
Science everywhere. Hey.
Science everywhere.
We got science everywhere.
Science everywhere. We got science everywhere. Science everywhere. We got science.
And I went to college and, you know, got a degree in biochemistry, and I decided, you know, I really want to enter the profession of teaching to really allow students like me who come from the same community I come from, who, you know, who love hip hop, to show them that they could be scientists too. Who has the best pencil tapping skills in here? Who's here? James?
I can see I'm a prophet. Going down the earth, you and down to me. So I'm a head coming back and forth.
You know, being a black male and teaching always comes this stigma that you understand black boys better, but good teaching is good teaching. I think it's absolutely a necessity for black male educators to be innovative in their practices when teaching young black men, just because young black men construct knowledge differently, they engage with their peers differently, they may view the world differently. So using these general and normal monolithic approach to teaching and learning are not the best approaches for our young black men. We got to be really innovative. We got to utilize our young boys' cultures, and we definitely got to incorporate hip hop and hip hop culture in the classroom. And when you look at the profession of teaching, it's a very challenging job. It's not easy. It's not for the faint of heart, and you have to love what you do. But I think when we talk about teacher preparation, we're focusing too much on just the intellect of our teachers and preparing teachers, and just not how they communicate and engage and relate to students.
Great. All right, so let me get back to our current slide. So that was a video of me just like sharing my inspirations and motivations and aspirations in teaching black men. And I became an educator intentionally to come back because the things we hear in the media about black male educators and the disparities and how, you know, they're out of all the teachers in the workforce, they're about like 3% black men. And the demographics of students don't represent that. So I really felt like it was my calling to come back and work with young people in urban communities, in particular in my community as well, to try to motivate them and inspire them that, you know, they can do what they want to do. And if becoming an educator is what you want to do, you can do that. You want to become an engineer, or what have you. But for me, it's really about motivating and inspiring young people to be all and what they want to be. Right. So when I talk about like my activities and what I do as a professor in my current job, in my current field, I really have three main jobs as a college professor, right? When I talk to all of my family and friends, like, oh, you know, you're a professor, you teach a couple times a week and that's it. But there's so much that goes into this job that I think a lot of people and a lot of students don't understand. So my three jobs are teaching, service, and scholarship. And with teaching, that goes into like my normal teaching load. So I teach about 3 courses a semester around education. So I teach urban education courses, science and STEM education courses, and courses that revolve around culture and education. And I teach during the week, and I love teaching the evenings at Seton Hall. So that's my teaching part and a task part of the job. And then I have a service commitment where like I think people don't recognize that colleges are run by their faculty and by the professors. So when it talks about service, that means like, you know, how are we sitting? We're sitting on committees. What service are we giving to the institution to create better opportunities and experiences for students? So one thing that I'm doing at Seton Hall right now in particular is I started a speaker series that I think is important for my students at Seton Hall to hear perspectives that are outside of the Seton Hall community in particular. So I'm bringing speakers who are renowned in the field of education to come and share their insight and share their research with my students to give them kind of a different perspective on the world of education. And that's one thing I do for service. And for scholarship, and that really scholarship just really revolves around this is my research and what am I doing to contribute to the field. So as a professor, we have to write journal articles that have to be peer reviewed. We go to conferences, we present our research. We do a lot of great things. But the beauty of being a professor is that it allows me to like really do things that I want to do as an individual, and allows me to conduct research in the spaces and the areas that I really think that there's a need and necessity to conduct research, right? So all of my research revolves around hip hop in some shape or form or fashion, right? And I tell people whenever I do presentations or talks, like I would not be here if it were not for hip hop. I love hip hop. It's ingrained in who I am. It's a part of me. I listen to hip hop music all the time. I listen to other genres as well, but I really identify as part of hip hop. Because one thing to me, what that hip hop allows me to do is it allows me to be authentic and allows me to be myself. And I think that young people in schools don't really feel like they can be themselves. And this is why I really want to inspire teachers to teach with kind of a hip hop aesthetic or hip hop pedagogy, so to speak. So these are just like, you know, me presenting, sharing my research. I write articles. I wrote a book, and I have another book coming out in June this year. But my first book is it's a compilation of chapters from hip hop scholars across the country who share their insight on how they teach with hip hop, how to utilize hip hop in educational spaces. And we have the second volume coming out next year. So it's just beautiful for me to really just go through this kind of trajectory in terms of like not really being engaged in schools, but always loving hip hop and always holding on to my hip hop identity, because this is what I would be using as an anchor for all of my research and all of my studies as a professor, right? I even created a class at Seton Hall that's called Understanding Urban Education Through the Context of Hip Hop. So now I'm also allowed and positioned to teach hip hop studies to my students and hip hop education to my students. I am a part of this organization. I help run this organization called Hip Hop Ed. And the beauty of the Hip Hop Ed is that it's an organization that really privileges hip hop knowledge and really allows and trains teachers to go into schools and teach with a hip hop aesthetic and hip hop pedagogy. But we have a lot of community initiatives, right? We have a counseling initiative where I have a friend, a colleague, Ian Levy, who goes out into schools and works with counselors who encourage students to write raps around their emotional experiences so they can have conversations about what's going on with them emotionally. And then we have a program called the Science Genius Program, where we go into schools and we work with science teachers so they can encourage their students to write science raps. And this is the most beautiful thing that I think I've ever participated in my life, right? Because I think every year of participating in the Science Genius Program, we've been around for 7 years now, is that it gets better. And I think there's also a stigma that, you know, men run I think hip hop is obviously a male dominated field. And I really want to work towards allowing and encouraging more women to have a voice within the hip hop landscape. But with the Science Genius program, what we've noticed is that a lot of our young women are actually coming to the forefront, right? So we go into schools, we work with teachers, and work with students. And over the course of the semester, our students craft these science raps. And these are the best raps that you've, like, I listen to some of these science raps sometimes, and I don't listen to some raps on the radio sometimes, because our students are phenomenal and they make and craft amazing raps that share their stories, that share their voices, that share their experiences and their realities. And this allows a teacher who may be an outsider to the student's experiences to come in and learn more about that student, and allowing and privileging that student's voice all at the same time, right? So I don't identify as a rapper at all, but I always say, if I encourage and allow my young students to rap and participate in writing raps in their classes, I can also, try to, right? So that's what I always encourage my teachers to try to write a rap, right? It's not the end of the world. It might be embarrassing, but when students laugh with you, you kind of break down those walls as if, the teacher has all the powers in the classroom, the teacher's dominating the classroom. And then you can allow student voice into the classroom, because that's what students need. I think our students really need an opportunity to share who they are and to share their voice and their perspectives in the classroom. And the Science Genius is a conduit and allows us to do so. So this is just an amazing program that's run. And we have it all across the country and in a couple other cities outside of the country. And we have it in Calgary, Alberta in Canada, Toronto, and in Jamaica. So the Science Genius program is definitely making strides and privileging the voices of those who have been marginalized in our society. And how can we uplift these voices in particular, right? So I have another video. This is the last video. And this kind of just shares the narrative of the Science Genius program and the power of the Science Genius program. Here, so I'm going to share my screen one last time so we can watch this last video, and then I will go in and talk about the things that colleges look for in candidates.
The aha moment for me around Science Genius is going into a classroom for what I thought was an exciting lesson about physics and seeing the kids bored.
The centralizing of students' voices is really what I love in students' experiences.
The cultural aspects of any community has to filter into the education.
There's a lot of sort of negative attention that young people feel when they walk into school spaces that don't value their culture.
They're so disengaged. They have headphones on. They have hoodies on in their classroom. And I come and say, we're going to rap. And the student's like, what are you talking about? We're going to rap.
When I knew how powerful physics was, and I saw in the class how bored they were, I knew something had to give, especially when I saw them in a hip-hop cipher getting it in.
Because sometimes kids go to school, the teachers don't look like them, and then they don't understand their cultural identity. And so when you're bringing up hip-hop, rap, and all this into the mix, and you're learning from it too.
Each words and each energy that is expressed through their language and through like what they're messaging is felt in a deeply social and emotional level. And now we're talking about in education, how can we provide social and emotional learning? And like the access for that is hip hop.
Well, I think it's like helping them co-design curriculum and lessons within classroom spaces. So if you're doing a lesson on force and you have young people talk about the force they experience on like a subway.
That's like a thread, a fiber that goes through your body that reinforces your knowledge and lets you know that, hey, this is part of my identity. This is part of my culture. This is part of who I am.
The best part about it is that they connect the content to their lives, their experiences, and their reality.
It's teaching them that they have value and they are brilliant and letting them understand that, letting them hold on to who they are.
They're the consumer, they're the customer, and if we're not listening to them, if we're not allowing them to drive the education that we're providing, then we're really missing the mark.
As an educator, my whole style has evolved. I've learned to embrace my authentic self. I've learned not to be pretentious anymore. I've learned to be what I call ratchetemic, which is that I could be ratchet and be hood and still be academic at the same time. And I want to model that for young people, and I want them to be able to carry that with them.
So that was just a quick glimpse of like some of the folks who work on the Science Genes program, and them just talking about how important it is to really allow young people to bring their cultures in the classroom, and their authentic selves in the classroom. So when we talk about what colleges look for in candidates, right? I'm a big advocate for anybody and whoever you are in wanting. We understand you want to be a part of a college, and you want to go. You have a dream college that you want to go to, but it's important to be your authentic self. And when you're applying to these colleges, and once you get there, right? So I want to talk to you about my journey in more detail about how I got to be Professor Adjapong, and what my trajectory looked like. So I went to undergrad at SUNY Plattsburgh, and before getting to SUNY Plattsburgh in my high school, I was just super involved in student government. And I went to a high school in New York City, and I was part of the first graduating class. And I went to a very small high school in New York that graduated about 98 students. We didn't even graduate 100 students, but because the school was so small, there were so many opportunities for young people, for students to be involved in the school. So I was involved in the Student Government Association, and a lot of other different cultural groups in my school. And I think that really allowed me to kind of write about that, and specifically and in detail, and about what I can contribute to SUNY Plattsburgh. And to be honest, when I was applying to undergrad, I didn't have it all figured out. I knew I wanted to do something in the sciences. I knew I wanted to be a pharmacist at that point in my life. So I declared a biochemistry major. But I know that, when I look back and reflect on my undergraduate application, I know that I made a lot of mistakes. I know that I didn't allow anybody to reread my application or to reread my essay, that when I read over it had a bunch of typos and grammatical errors in it. I know that it could have been a better application, a stronger application. But SUNY Plattsburgh really allowed me an opportunity, and they accepted me, and I think that's where I really flourished. I went to school 6 hours north of New York City, so I came home maybe once, if that, a semester. So I was really on my own. My parents took me up there and dropped me off, and the next time my parents visited me was when I graduated. I had other siblings who went away far, who traveled far for college as well. I think that when I got to college, as being the last of 3 children, my parents were just tired of traveling and going to visit me. So, and I could totally understand that. But when looking back at my application to SUNY Plattsburgh and other colleges that I applied to in undergrad, I recognized that I could have asked for more support. I was really hard-headed and had too much pride to really reach out to ask for help when I look back at my senior year in high school. But I got into SUNY Plattsburgh, and while at SUNY Plattsburgh, my freshman year, I realized as a biochemistry major that I did not know it all. I did not have the same level of understanding of science content that most of my peers did. And I'd be in chemistry classes, and people were answering questions about atoms and chemicals and molecules, and I had no idea what they were talking about. And that's when I realized that I kind of had less knowledge. And it was important for me to just to recognize that, and to also hone in on that understanding, and that really forced me to go into the library and study hard and rigorously to make sure that I caught up to my peers, because I knew that if the way that college works is very fast paced, and your professors, when you come in, they expect you to have a basic level of understanding, or they all expect you to have some level of understanding when you're in that class, and they don't go back and reteach content or material. And that's when I realized that the education that I gained in New York City, although it wasn't the best education, and that students who went to schools in suburbs and other smaller towns and more affluent areas across the state of New York, that they had access to better education. And that was also another driving force subconsciously for me to go back and really try to make some changes in my community. But while at SUNY Plattsburgh, I was super into my studies. I graduated with honors. I graduated 3.5 GPA as a biochemistry major. And I was the only person when I graduated in my department who graduated with honors. But I was also super involved on campus. And I think that's what really allowed me to just hone in and hone on my skills as a leader. I was a resident assistant, and I was in charge of students in the dorms. I was a student ambassador. And as a student ambassador, I would help with open house activities. I helped recruit students to come to campus, and I would give campus tours. I was a student senator, and I was part of student government at SUNY Plattsburgh. And my position focused on diversity issues. So then that allowed me to have a lot of workshops and events on campus that address issues of race and diversity. I also started a fraternity that I talked about earlier. I was a teacher's assistant for many classes, and I was a genetic researcher. And that is where I really kind of like fell in love with the hands-on application of science. And being a genetic researcher allowed me to go to conferences as an undergrad student to present my research. And that's really where I got my eyes opened up to other students in other states about what the work that they're doing in their programs and on their campuses as well. And I was also a tutor on campus that really allowed me to hone in on my skills and really see myself as an educator. So, you know, when I think about all these things as an undergrad and what I wanted to do when I continued, I was like, you know what, I want to be an educator. And being an educator in New York State, you have to have a master's degree. So I was like, you know what, let me get my master's degree and become a teacher. So then I applied and I got into Teachers College University. And I think what really made me stand out in my application to Teachers College is that I knew what I wanted to do. In my senior year at SUNY Plattsburgh, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I've had experiences with a lot of youth communities and youth development organizations. So I have evidence of me doing what I want to do in the future. And I was also very persistent. And I was persistent, I was consistent in all of my activities. So I think the graduate school really saw that and thought that I'll make a great asset and a great student at that school. And at Teachers College, the program was only a 1-year program, and I graduated in a year. And that's why I have this arrow going down. That's when I started teaching in the Bronx. But then I think when I started teaching, I realized that, wow, I can make I love being a teacher and I love interacting with my students on a day-to-day basis, but I can make a bigger impact if I obtain my doctorate and became a researcher and a scholar in the field of education, because I will have the credentials that will privilege my voice and therefore privilege the voice of people who come from my community. And that was really important to me. So I taught science in the Bronx for a number of years, but I taught full time, and I continued my education at Teachers College full time as well. So then I strategically wanted to go into. I knew I wanted to get a doctorate program, and I know the politics of higher education. Oftentimes, you know, going from a 1-year master's program into a doctorate program is not always the best, and a lot of professors may not think that you're prepared for doctoral studies at that point. So strategically, I was like, you know what, let me go into these other master's programs and get the master's degrees that ultimately go into the doctorate degree. So it's important as you're thinking about navigating colleges that you understand the landscape of your university or the university that you really want to attend. And you could do that by, you know, emailing faculty members, emailing professors, or when you go to open houses, getting students' contact information and reaching out to them. So they can help you understand the landscape since you're not there yet. I understood the landscape at Teachers College, and that allowed me to obtain a different master's degree. So once I got my master's in philosophy, I was only a few credits short of getting my PhD and writing my dissertation and graduating. And I was doing all this while teaching full time. So I was really busy over those years, but I recognized that I would have to make a commitment around my time in order to really be successful and do what I wanted to reach my goals. You know, it's not about really being successful. I think I'm successful in whatever I do, but I had these goals that I set for myself, and I wanted to reach them. So, you know, by the time I got into my doctoral studies program, it was time for me to think about what I wanted to write for my dissertation. Your dissertation is essentially kind of a book that you write before you graduate with your PhD, and you have to conduct some type of original research. And I was so happy because I had a great support system at Teachers College Columbia that allowed me to study what I wanted to study. And I studied hip hop, and I studied a framework of utilizing hip hop in schools to teach students. And I graduated, and I immediately got a job at Seton Hall University, which I was super excited to get a job at because it's proximal to New York City. So that meant that I can stay in New York and continue doing the work in the communities that I love to serve in New York City, right? So when you think about what colleges look for in candidates, right, we know like AP courses, honors classes are important because you want to demonstrate to colleges that you yourself challenge yourself academically, because oftentimes AP honors courses, I know a lot of schools offer them, but there are also courses that really push students to be challenged more. So if you take those courses and self-elect to take those courses as well, it really looks well. It looks good in your application. Another thing that looks really good is I know in New York City in particular, they have a program called College Now. Not College Now, I'm sorry. It's a program that allows you to take college courses as a high school student, right? So that demonstrates, like, I'm not in college yet, but I know I want to go to college and I want to be in college. So I'm going to get ahead of the curve and start taking some college courses that allow me to earn credit. So that's a great opportunity. I did that in high school as well, and I earned about 6 college credits before I got to college. And it also makes college a little cheaper because, or allows you to have a little bit more freedom and flexibility in your schedule because you've taken courses that you don't need to take once you get to college. What extracurricular activities and volunteer activities are you participating in? And how does that revolve around what you see yourself doing when you get to college, or your major once you get to college? And I think more importantly, it's the consistency in those activities, right? For me, I think I have a very specific thread and theme in my experiences that I like working with young people. So everything that I did revolved around working with young people or teaching and education in some aspect or form, right? So you don't want to just do these one-off things and just say, oh, I did that, or I got that experience, or I did that. But you want to make sure that all of your experiences are well-rounded and contribute to one cause, or support you in what you want to study. So if you want to be a TV or production major, television production major, maybe trying to find volunteering opportunities at newspapers, in news and media, maybe supporting organizations in their social media, right? Because social media is very closely tied to news and media right now as well. So like, how are you either being consistent in the things that you're doing, but also making the argument of what you are doing and how that connects and ties into what you want to study? Because they want to see your thought process and when you write your letters and your essays and going into college. Test scores are important for many reasons, but I don't believe that test scores are a true representation of knowledge and skill of students. So I personally don't focus too much on test scores, but unfortunately the systems and institutions continue, and they still do, right? So it's also important about recognizing, what the institutions want as opposed to what we think they want. So with essay, when it comes to SATs and ACTs, if you don't have the resources to get, a tutor or get some type of additional support outside of your school, I always recommend students just getting a SAT book, maybe from Kaplan or College Board, to just study on your own. But you have to be committed and dedicate the time to. So I always tell my students who are going to college that maybe every weekend you should be studying for at least 3 to 4 hours, just to get ahead of the curve and to increase your scores when you're taking these exams. Quality recommendation letters, like really get recommendation letters from people who really know who you are. And to get recommendation letters from people who know who you are, you need to have good relationships with people, right? So it's important to like maybe make sure that you have great relationships with people and that people know who you are, and that people understand who you are. So a well-written essay is super important. I didn't have this when I applied to undergrad, but I always tell students to like make sure you have at least 2 to 3 people look over your essays before you submit them to the colleges, because if you have grammatical errors, they're oftentimes going to write you off, just because of that. So it's important to make sure you have people, people who are your friends, your colleagues, your teachers to help look over your essay, and that your essays also demonstrate your talents and your passions. What are the things that you're super passionate about, and what are you going to contribute to the institution, right? It's not always about what the institution is going to contribute to you, but what are you willing to contribute to the institution, right? We talk about qualities of great candidates, right? They want to see that you're a leader, right? So what leadership opportunities have you had and experiences have you had? What's your commitment, and how committed are you to making sure that there's some type of change on this campus when you get there? What's your work ethic, right? Once you come to the college, are you just going to be a student who's not going to be involved, right? Not participate in things, or are you going to be somebody who works really hard academically, but also socially? Public service, how are you giving support and giving your efforts out to communities in need? Openness, ambition, curiosity are just great, qualities that we should all have, and being open-minded and growing, right? If you have a curiosity in solving problems, right? Colleges and institutions always want to make sure that they have the best students so that they can say that, oh, our students went off to do this and our students went off to do that. So it's important to demonstrate that you have these qualities as you are looking at applying to colleges. And the best way to demonstrate this is in your letter, in your interviews, when you're on campus talking to teachers during open house, talking to professors and during open houses and such, right? These are some quick links and resources that you can look at as you're thinking about applying to college. This first link right here has a number of articles from Edutopia, pardon me, that you can look at that talk about the social emotional aspect of college, being away from home, being a person of color at a predominantly white institution, mental health services. And these are all things I think we don't talk about enough, especially for students of color as they're navigating higher education, because institutions of higher education are predominantly white across our nation, right? So many students of color may feel alienated, right? College Board is also a tool that we all need when you're applying to college, because it had, all your SAT and ACT scores can be easily accessed there. I'm going to run through these tips on applying to college. I know we're getting short on time, but know your deadlines. I always really encourage students to have an Excel sheet of the deadlines, the test requirements, all of the requirements to get into that program, the location of that program, what major you would want to apply to in that program, or if you're undecided, and having this Excel sheet for all the schools that you want to apply to, just so you have everything in front of you, so that you know what's expected of you, and you know what you have to reach to be accepted into these colleges. Read the instructions on the applications, obviously, right? But just know the instruction and know what these applications are asking you for, and provide all of their requested information. And I can tell you, I look over applications I see in hall sometimes, and I see students not providing all of the information. And proofreading is super important. We talked about that. And being honest about what you're able to provide, because admission staff oftentimes does verify a lot of the things that you talk about in your applications. Choose your recommendations wisely. You want somebody who knows who you are, teachers, counselors, community members, right? Who can speak about you both inside and outside the classrooms. You want to have your transcripts ready. You want to have copies of everything, just in case college admissions officers say they didn't receive something, which happens often because they're getting thousands of applications at a time. And you also want to make sure you confirm that your application materials have arrived. All right. And this is some final thoughts for us. I always I listen to music, and I have quotes that always keep me going, because there are times when we just feel depleted. And these are two that I want to share with everybody here. The first is, compare yourself only to who you were yesterday and be your own competition. And oftentimes, I think, especially in this era of social media, we always want to compare ourselves to the next person, or the person who's about 10 steps or 10 years ahead of us. But, focus on yourself as your own competition. Just make sure that you're being a better person day after day, day after day. And don't settle for good, compete to be great, right? Don't ever settle for anything. Always try to strive to be a better person and strive to get something that, that you want, and always have goals and expectations for yourself, and always have action steps in order to reach those goals and expectations for yourself. And I believe that is it. So here's my information and my email address. If anybody wants to contact me, feel free to do so. I can provide any support and assistance, as I love working with young people from all communities and areas and backgrounds. So thank you all.
Thank you very much. That was an amazing overview of the work that you've done, the tremendous work that you've done, but also the details and how you've impacted the lives of so many students. You said that you being of Ghanaian parents, you had initially wanted to pursue something in medicine. So how would you recommend, again, our audience, we do work with young people of immigrant backgrounds.
Of course.
How would you say that how did you maybe deal with that conversation that might be difficult sometimes to have?
Yeah, that is a difficult conversation. I think for me, I have two, my mom is very loving and very nurturing. But for me, I think my parents, once they recognized, they weren't the happiest when I wanted to be a teacher. For many reasons, right? The perception of teachers in the media, there's always a negative perception of teachers, always a negative perception of students and young people, and the perception that teachers don't get paid well. So how am I going to support my future family? But when I showed my parents, when my parents saw how committed I was and all the activities I was engaging in, and going to school and furthering my education and getting my doctorate degree in this, they realized it was the real deal, and this is what I love to do. And they saw that I was happy in doing it. I think that was important for them to see this me being happy, but also me furthering my education and my experience in this, right? So it's like, yeah, I'm becoming a teacher, but even as a teacher, when I was teaching in the school in the Bronx, I was a teacher leader. I was still doing a lot of things to support students and other teachers in the community. So my parents saw how happy I was in doing this and how hard I worked in doing this. So they said, if this is where your heart is, then we can't tell you to do anything else. And just, as long as you're happy. So, I definitely appreciated my parents for that. And I know that all families are not as understanding, but, I tell students that, you live your life for you, right? And your parents, they're not going to live their lives. So you have to communicate that to them, that you're doing what makes you happy and you're following your passions and your dreams. So, sometimes you, as a young person too, you just have to be okay with telling your parents that and continue to follow your passions and your dreams.
Yeah, and I think it's important for them at that age to know that other people have had that same difficult conversation. They're not unique in having that possible conflict or confrontation. It's immigrants come here with a particular vision, dream, the American dream, especially for their children. And so no one's necessarily unique, but if you do prove yourself and the passion and the success that you can achieve in that career, the parents eventually come around. So I think that's important for them to know.
Yeah.
And we do have Crystal's question. Has there ever been a time where you set a goal for yourself and you weren't able to succeed at it? And how did you overcome that challenge?
Yeah, I mean, and I need to be better at talking about my failures, because there's nobody in the world is successful without meeting failure, right? I think the reality is that we're all going to meet failure. And I've met failure many times, right? So as a professor, I have to write journal articles and submit them to journals to be accepted. There were times where I applied for scholarships or grants or I applied to, I didn't want to go to SUNY Plattsburgh as an undergraduate student. So that was a failure, right? But that was the best school out of the schools that I got into, that was my best option. So I decided to go there. We all have failure. We all meet failure. And for me, you always have to make the best out of your failure, right? And once you fail, you have to recalibrate. If you want to be upset and frustrated, it's okay to do so, but you don't want to be consumed with those frustrations, right? Be upset for a moment, be sad for a day, 2 at the most, and then figure out, okay, I didn't meet this goal. So let me recalibrate and re-strategize as to how I can either meet that goal or meet the next one. Right? It's really about just being persistent and not taking no for an answer. And always going back and recalibrating and becoming more strategic as to meeting your goals, right? We're always going to meet failure. And I think successful folks, we don't share as to all the times we want to meet failure, because we might be embarrassed of it, but I'm not embarrassed of anything. You also have to find the people in your corner who support you and who are always going to be there with you, because sometimes you can't get out your own head about being a failure, right? So maybe it's a best friend, or maybe it's a parent, or maybe it's a family member, right? But you always want to have somebody to lean on when you have these instances that they're going to tell you, you know what, they missed out, right? They didn't accept you, or they didn't want you to come to their program, or what have you, and it's their loss. So that doesn't mean it's not a representation of who you are or what you're doing, and always continue to be and going forward and do the next thing. One thing I tell people too, especially young people, is that once you get older, you recognize that our society operates in a very interesting way. And oftentimes they are really good candidates who should get a job or should be accepted into a program that are not, for political reasons, or because other people have networked their way in, right? So you don't want to feel less than because of that. And, you need to always make sure that you kind of just pick yourself up and keep going.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's actually a point that I was going to touch on, and then you mentioned it. I think it's also knowing that sometimes you might describe your failure in relation to what others have achieved without really thinking about what opportunities others had that you may not have had. So in relation to some students wanting to, go to a certain university for undergrad, but not necessarily having challenging courses at their high school to really improve themselves. And so, the selectivity of the colleges from one school versus another is going to drastically change because of the rigor of the curriculum sometimes. And that's just a part of life, unfortunately, that people like you and we at SPEAK are trying to change.
Yeah.
So a reality that we have to deal with.
Unfortunately, yeah.
Unfortunately. And Crystal also mentioned, if you can touch briefly on, also I can relate to you when you said you didn't feel a connection in school and with the school work. I don't have teachers that try to connect with me and work, and I often feel less motivated to do the work. How should I try and solve that problem myself?
Yeah, this is a great question, Crystal. Number one, I don't think this is a problem that you take on by yourself. Number one, I think students don't recognize I think our education system is broken. Number one, I think our education system, our education, our school system wasn't created for people of color. And I think that's one of the main reasons why it's broken, right? I think many teachers I love teachers, but there are also many teachers who come in, they teach and do their job and they leave, right? And they don't really put all of the effort and energy that they could or should be into the job. And I know teachers who are using the same curriculum for 10, 15 years ago, that's outdated. I think as a young person, Crystal, you need to recognize that, unfortunately, like, you need to play the game of education, right? Until you can get to a point in a space where you can make change, right? And that's why I really encourage young people to become advocates for their communities, right? Because, this is what I'm doing. The same things I saw in schools, I was disengaged. I became a teacher and I saw students disengaged. So now I have a platform and a voice where I can go out and work with teachers who can change that for their students, right? And I can't do it all in one breath, but I can make little change. But I think you need to recognize in your school. I think the first thing for you, Crystal, you can do is maybe share with your teachers and your school administrators about how you feel, so they recognize it, because they may not know. And number two, if nothing changes after that, I think it's important to maybe find something extracurricular that you love to do, right? Just because you don't love school or you feel like you don't have a connection to your teachers in school, that doesn't mean that you won't feel connected to anything within the realm of education, right? So what are other resources or things that you can participate in and engage in, like the SPEAK organization, or like what are other things that are happening in the city of New York that you can participate in, or what are some hobbies that you may have that you can connect to your schooling, and then ultimately getting to a space where you can talk about these issues and help students in your school. I think the first step is letting your teachers and your school administrators know in a respectful manner. Maybe writing a letter to your principal, maybe writing a letter to your teacher, maybe talking to your teacher on the side if you feel comfortable. I know that's another big layer of it, that we may not feel comfortable to talk to our school leaders, right? Whenever I talk to school parents in particular and students, I tell them, who has the most power in the schools, and it's the parents. It's the parents and it's the students, because you are the consumers, right? With no students, there'll be no school. Right, so it's important for you to share your voice as to how you feel in that space, so that they can try to adapt and make you feel more comfortable in that space. But it's definitely the school's responsibility to do so.
Yeah, I think those are all great points. And personally, knowing Crystal, I know that she is a leader at her school, and she does try to engage other students who might feel disengaged, or even try to bring other activities to the school. If the school is lacking those kinds of resources. And I think sometimes the students do have to take their own initiative and create that space within the and I think that's an amazing question. Thank you for asking it, Crystal. And thank you for answering it as well. Thank you again. We look forward to also seeing you at the summit in 2 weeks, and meeting you in person and having hearing your story, and getting our students to meet you in person.
Of course, I'm excited.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.